Welcome to Through a Glass Darkly Radio. You're listening to us on United Public Radio. And the intro song was Mark of the Doomslayer by Karl Casey at White Bat Audio. How's everyone doing tonight? Oh, this is like... Hey, Logan. Good to see you. Where's everybody else? It's quiet. Roger Claiborne is saying, my Cherokee great-grandmother from the Cherokee Nation was very psychic. Not only that, but she talked to visible spirits regularly. My half-Cherokee grandmother saw them and was scared of them. Interesting. All right, well, I'm going to get started relatively quickly because this one's kind of long and I don't have a ton of time. So just the usual forewarnings. If you're subscribed to the channel and you think you're subscribed to the channel, please confirm that you are subscribed to the channel because YouTube has a habit of unsubscribing people randomly, even though YouTube would deny that. So just please triple check, make sure you're subscribed. Number two, For the topics of, for the script, I generated it with AI. I reviewed it, obviously. But if you're not into that, totally understand. Now's the time to bounce. With that, I'm ready to get started. We are getting pretty close to 20,000 people. I did not think in a million years we would get there in November. Well, we're still not there yet, but we maybe have 72 subscribers left. If you're a new subscriber, welcome. Thank you for coming here. And without further ado, I don't want to make people wait any longer to get started. So here we go. The psychic gene. Are abductees and experiencers born or made? In both popular culture and scholarly fringe inquiry, claims persist that psychic abilities such as telepathy, precognition, or extrasensory perception and UFO abduction experiences tend to cluster in particular families and bloodlines. All right, let me just mark where I was on the comments so that I don't get lost when I come back. All right. Just throw that down there. It shouldn't annoy people too much. Okay. This has raised the provocative question: are experiencers born or made? In other words, do certain people inherit a predisposition to paranormal phenomena, a so-called psychic gene, or are all these experiences largely the product of environmental factors like culture, upbringing, or personal psychology? The debate straddles multiple disciplines. Geneticists and parapsychologists explore possible hereditary markers for psychic traits, while psychologists examine cognitive and emotional profiles that might dispose individuals to perceive or believe in extraordinary events. Anthropologists point to cultural contexts in which spiritual visions or alien encounters are interpreted and even expected, suggesting an experiential shaping. Meanwhile, ufologists have noted intriguing patterns in abduction reports, such as multiple generations of the same family reporting contact experiences, fueling speculation about targeted lineages. This podcast approaches the topic with a public-facing tone but scholarly rigor, acknowledging that much of the evidence is controversial or anecdotal. We will review folklore and historical accounts of inherited psychic gifts, focusing especially on traditions within Celtic, so for instance, Scottish, Gaelic, Irish, etc., and Cherokee, cultures that have been linked to higher rates of alleged paranormal abilities or UFO encounters. We will then examine modern research findings, from family and twin studies on psychic ability to a recent pilot genetic study on psychics. Turning to ufology, we'll discuss data and case studies of alien abductions running in families, including claims, some from investigators within the intelligence community, that have a striking proportion of experiencers, or that a striking portion of experiencers share Celtic or Native American ancestry. Equally important, this podcast will weigh alternative explanations. Many mainstream psychologists argue that experiencers are made not by aliens or genes, but by psychological and social factors. Traits like fantasy proneness, hypnotic susceptibility, dissociation, and prior trauma have been found more frequently in self-described abductees than in the general population. Cultural exposure to science fiction and UFO lore provides a narrative template that can shape one's interpretation of strange nighttime events. For example, episodes of sleep paralysis accompanied by hallucinations. We will explore how such factors might induce abduction memories or psychic experiences absent any genetic predisposition. Finally, the paper will incorporate from governmental research and declassified reports. Projects like the U.S. Army's Project Stargate sought individuals with genuine psychic spying abilities and even trained personnel in remote viewing, implicitly affirming a belief that some people naturally possess stronger psi faculties. On the UFO front, while official investigations like Project Blue Book in the 1950s and 60s largely dismissed abduction tales as anecdotal, later government-affiliated studies quietly took interest in physiological and psychological effects on experiencers. These perspectives add context to how seriously or not authorities have treated the idea of inherited extraordinary abilities. Through a critical synthesis of these diverse sources, from peer-reviewed studies and government documents to experiencer testimonials and cultural narratives, this podcast will aim to answer whether a psychic gene might underlie these phenomena, or whether the truth lies in a more nuanced combination of heredity, culture, and mind. The overarching goal is not only to assess scientific evidence, but also to honor the human experiences and cultural meanings behind claims of the paranormal. In doing so, we maintain a balance between open-minded exploration and scientific skepticism, acknowledging the limitations of current knowledge. The sections that follow address the topic from several angles: hereditary psychic phenomena, cultural lineage myths, patterns in UFO abduction cases, genetic and physiological theories, psychological frameworks, and finally, a cross-disciplinary discussion on nature versus nurture in the making of an experiencer. Let's first start with folklore and the family, psychic gifts and cultural lineages. Throughout history, many cultures have believed that psychic or spiritual gifts run in families. In ancestral folklore, having the sight or otherworldly abilities was often considered an inherited trait, sometimes revered, sometimes feared. Two cultures frequently cited in discussions of inherited psi are the Celtic peoples, notably those of the Scottish Highlands and Ireland, and certain Native American nations, such as the Cherokee. These groups have rich traditions that offer context for modern claims that inherited psychic traits among their descendants, or about inherited psychic traits among their descendants. Let's start with Scottish second sight. In Gaelic and Highland Scottish folklore, second sight, called da Shalad in Gaelic, literally two sight, refers to the ability to perceive future or distant events, often through visions or apparitions. This gift was considered to pass down through bloodlines. Historical accounts, including clan records and oral narratives, describe certain families where multiple members exhibited second sight. For example, one family's genealogy simply noted of an ancestor, quote, had her second sight, end quote, implying this ability was a known family trait. Perhaps the most famous Scottish seer, Coinec Odhar, the Brahon seer, circa 1650, which legendarily granted his vision by a magic stone, but many lesser-known seers were simply born into it. A survey by folklorist Martin Martin in the 17th century found the gift of second sight hereditarily entailed in some Isle of Skye families. Even in the 20th century, researchers documented that belief. A 1994 survey in northern Scotland found people with second sight were likely to report at least one close relative with the same ability. Thus, Celtic tradition provides a long-standing model of a psychic lineage. Then there's Cherokee and Native American vision traditions. Among Native American peoples, spiritual powers are often embodied in cultural practice, but heredity can still play a role. The Cherokee, one of the largest indigenous groups in the South or the southern United States, have folklore about certain families or clan lines possessing strong spiritual medicine or talking to spirits. In Cherokee tradition, medicine knowledge was sometimes passed through family lines, and stories of the little people, or supernatural beings, and star beings hinted that some individuals could see or interact with other realms. Anthropologists noted that many Native American cultures, including the Cherokee, allow that visions and prophetic dreams may be more readily granted to those from particular lineages, often those groomed to be shamans or healers by elder relatives. While former hereditary priesthoods were not universal, anecdotal evidence suggests, for example, that a medicine man might teach his son or granddaughter the rituals if he sensed they had the gift. This creates an environment where belief in inherited spiritual ability is strong. Furthermore, some modern Cherokee experiencers of UFO phenomena have linked their experiences to ancestral stories of star people visiting their ancestors, implying a familial continuity and contact. Though these connections are largely anecdotal, they contribute to a perception that Cherokee bloodlines carry an openness to otherworldly encounters. It is important to recognize that in these cultures, nature and nurture intertwine. A child raised in the highlands hearing that second sight runs in our family may be more attentive to subtle intuitions or visions, thereby reinforcing that trait. Likewise, a Cherokee child whose elders speak of visionary experiences might be more likely to interpret their own unusual perceptions as significant. Sociologist Andrew Greeley observed that people who report frequent psychic experiences often come from families that openly accept such phenomena. If a culture or family nurtures a belief in psychic ability, members with even slight predispositions may develop them further. Thus, folklore about inherited gifts can become a self-fulfilling framework. The belief itself is transmuted or transmitted alongside or instead of any gene. Nonetheless, the cross-generational pattern in these traditions cannot be dismissed as only cultural. Historical pedigree analyses have been attempted. In the 1990s, Dr. Susan Blackmore and Dr. Saibo A. Khan both investigated Scottish second sight from a genetics perspective. In one study, Khan analyzed 130 family histories of individuals with second sight and found a strong tendency for the ability to cluster in families, consistent with a heritable trait. Cohn's segregation analysis tentatively suggested an autosomal, non-sex related dominant inheritance with incomplete penetrance, meaning roughly one parent with that trait gives about a 50% chance to each child, but not everyone with the gene manifests the ability. Indeed, reports from the Highlands long held that if one parent had the gift, there was roughly a half chance the child would too. Modern parapsychologists often cite these findings as evidence that a psi gene could exist. Then there's modern research on heritability of psi phenomena. Moving from folklore to laboratory and survey data, the question of whether psychic abilities are inherited has intrigued researchers on the fringe of psychology and biology for decades. While parapsychology remains a controversial field, a handful of studies have sought to apply scientific rigor to the notion of a heritable psi or psychic trait. Here we review some key research efforts ranging from family studies and twin studies to exploratory genetic analyses to see what evidence supports or refutes the idea of an innate psychic gene. We'll start with family and twin studies. Early psychical researchers noted anecdotal patterns of psychic talent in families. For instance, renowned mediums often had parents or grandparents who also reported psychic experiences. Modern researchers have attempted more systematic surveys. One notable example is the Scottish second sight surveys mentioned earlier. In addition to Coyne's work in the 1990s, other investigators like Dr. Carolyn Watt and Dr. Harvey J. Irwin have collected family data on various psi phenomena, which to include telepathy, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, etc. The general finding is that people who believe they have psychic abilities are significantly more likely to report relatives, especially first-degree relatives with similar claims, compared to non-psychics. This familial aggregation suggests a possible genetic component, though shared environment could also be at play. We'll get to more on that later on. Twin studies provide another angle. If psychic ability has a genetic basis, one might expect identical twins to have more concordant psychic experiences than fraternal twins. Few formal twin studies on psi have been conducted, partly because psychic ability is hard to quantify. But related research on anomalous communication between twins often popularly reported as twins sensing each other's distress at a distance, indicates high anecdotal rates in identical twins. However, skeptics argue this could be due to emotional closeness rather than telepathy. No definitive twin study evidence for a specific inherited psychic trait has yet been published in mainstream scientific literature. Still, parapsychologist Dr. Russell Targ once noted that among the Stargate remote viewers he worked with, more on Stargate later, those who excelled sometimes had psychic parents. While such comments are informal, they keep alive the hypothesis that genes might play a role. Then there's genetic case control study, which is Wabe et al. In 2021. The most direct attempt to locate a psychic gene came recently from a team of researchers at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS, led by Helene Wabe and Dr. Dean Radin, who we all know from this channel. In fact, I'm going to be interviewing him in late December again, so more on that in the future. Anyway, among others. In 2021, they published a pilot study titled Genetics of Psychic Ability, a pilot case control exome sequencing study. This study compared the DNA of 13 individuals who were identified as highly psychic based on having repeated, verifiable psi experiences in laboratory settings, with 10 control individuals without such abilities. They sequenced the exomes, which are protein coding regions of the genome, of all participants to look for any genetic variants associated with the psychic group. The results were intriguing, albeit preliminary. The researchers did not find a single psychic gene that all the gifted individuals shared. Instead, they found a difference in frequency of certain genetic markers between the two groups. Most notably, 7 of the 9 psychic controls had a particular DNA variation, a single nucleotide polymorphism in a non-coding intron region on chromosome 7 adjacent to gene TNRC18, whereas none of the psychics had this variant. In other words, the psychically adept individuals were homozygous, both copies the same, at the gene locus, lacking the mutation that many controls had. This suggests that the presence of the mutation might somehow inhibit psychic ability, or conversely, that the absence of the mutation, for instance, the normal version of the gene, could be necessary, though not sufficient for psychic capacity. The gene TNRC18 itself is not well understood, but this finding hints that genetics may influence psi by a mechanism of suppression or facilitation. Perhaps certain gene variants close the door to anomalous perception, whereas lacking those variants leaves the door ajar. The authors caution that this was a small sample exploratory study. The finding could be a fluke and needs replication with larger groups. However, it represents a milestone, the first published genetic data related to psychic ability. It shifts the conversation from, is there a psychic gene, to which genes might influence psychic tendencies and how. The initial implication that a genetic mutation might suppress psi dovetails with the idea that we may all be born with some intuitive or psi potential that is usually turned off in most people, except in a few where the switch remains on. Some theorists compared it to musical talent. Many people carry the genes that enable musical ability, but only with the right mix of genes and environment does a virtuoso emerge. Then there are physiological correlates. While not genetics per se, some research has looked at whether people who report psychic experiences have distinctive neurological or physiological traits that could be genetic. For instance, studies by Dr. Michael Persinger and others have examined the role of the temporal lobes in paranormal experiences. A subset of the population has what Persinger calls temporal lobe lability, meaning that temporal lobes involved in sensory integration and memory are prone to small seizures or sudden bursts of activity. This can induce sensations like hearing voices, feeling a presence, or seeing visions, experiences that could be interpreted as psychic or otherworldly. Such temporal lobe sensitivity has been noted in some self described psychics and also in alien abductees. There is evidence that this neurological profile can run in families, suggesting a genetic predisposition to this kind of brain activity. If that predisposition is present, a person might be more likely to have spontaneous trance states, hallucinations, or messages, which culturally could be framed as psychic gifts. Another angle is synesthesia, or high intuition, traits that are partly heritable. Some psychics display extreme intuition or an ability to make connections, say between people and events, that others miss. Cognitive scientists might attribute this to an openness to unusual patterns in perception, which has some genetic basis related to creativity. In some, while no clear-cut ESP gene has been pinpointed, research hints at complex genetic contribution to the propensity for psychic or anomalous experiences. Then there could be environmental and developmental factors. It is crucial to note that even staunch psi proponents do not claim genes alone determine psychic ability. The environment seems to play a major role. As one Ion's blog article title aptly put it, how psychic suppression may impact the heredity of psi genes. Developmental psychology shows that children often exhibit seemingly psychic behaviors, for instance, imaginary friends, intuitive hunches, etc., which they might outgrow. Some parapsychologists argue that children have natural psi that becomes suppressed by social conditioning. If a child is born into a family that encourages psychic exploration, those abilities might flourish, whereas in a skeptical or fearful environment, they might be shut down. For example, an IRB member at IONS, Dr. Eleanor Criswell, notes that children sometimes show evidence of psychic ability in early childhood, but it often subsides as they develop, possibly because parents and society train them to ignore such perceptions. Conversely, a family that practices openness can nurture psi across generations. Sociologist Charles Emmons documented cases of third-generation mediums who had been explicitly trained by their psychic elders. In one case, a woman who, as a little girl, told her mother she saw a spirit man in the corner, was met not with disbelief but with a challenge. Her mother calmly asked, "What's his name?" treating the vision as real. Another medium recounted that her grandmother played psychic games with her, like hiding an object and encouraging the child to psychically locate it. These nurturing behaviors likely strengthened the child's confidence and ability in psi, showing that nurture can amplify nature. Thus, even if a genetic factor exists, it works in tandem with upbringing. In summary, modern research provides tentative support for psychic abilities being partly heritable, while also highlighting the powerful influence of environment. The idea of a monolithic psychic gene is overly simplistic. Instead, multiple genes, each with small effects, combined with supportive cultural context, may produce an individual who seems naturally gifted in psi. As we turn to the UFO abduction arena, a similar question arises. Might certain people or families be predisposed to encountering or at least reporting contact with non-human intelligences? UFO abductions and family bloodlines, patterns and claims. Reports of alien abduction, people describing being taken by extraterrestrial beings, usually for examinations or other procedures, surged in the latter half of the 20th century. By the 1980s and 1990s, researchers like Bud Hopkins, Dr. David Jacobs, and Dr. John Mack had collected hundreds of case testimonies. Amid these accounts, an intriguing refrain emerged. It runs in the family. Many alleged abductees discovered that their parents, grandparents, or children have experienced similar mysterious encounters. This section examines the evidence for generational patterns in abductions and the hypothesis that certain lineages are targeted, with a focus on the oft-mentioned Celtic and Native American, especially Cherokee, connection. First, there are generational abductions. It happened to my parents too. Some of the earliest widely publicized abductees Betty and Barney Hill in 1961 did not report any familiar link. Their case was considered isolated. However, as investigators dug deeper in subsequent cases, they began asking experiencers if any odd occurrences happened to them as children or to other family members. The results were surprising. For instance, Bud Hopkins wrote in Intruders, 1987, that one abduction victim underwent hypnosis to recover memories. She recalled that her mother and grandmother had also been visited. Hopkins started to suspect a pattern of multi-generational involvement, suspecting that the phenomenon tracked certain families over decades. This was later supported by data. Dr. John Mack noted in his 1994 book, Abduction, that abductions run in families, sometimes over 3 or more generations. An even more specific statistic has circulated in the UFO community. Allegedly, up to 60% or more of known abductees have a parent or child who is also an abductee. While this figure is hard to verify precisely, it aligns with informal surveys by groups like MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. In a 2012 interview, UFO researcher Kathleen Marden, Betty Hill's niece, and an investigator who conducted large surveys of experiencers, confirmed this trend. When asked, "Is it true that abductions run in families?" Marden responded, "Many people have indicated to me that abductions have happened to others in their families." She cited the work of Dr. James Harder of APRO, they were the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, who investigated many abduction cases and noted that the abductees had been followed throughout their lives. In other words, once a person is tagged as an abductee, later in life, their children might also begin having experiences. From a ufological perspective, this raises the question of why would aliens follow family lines? Several hypotheses have been proposed within the experiencer community and by researchers like Jacobs and Hopkins. Genetic experimentation. It could be the first one. A common theory is that extraterrestrials are conducting a long-term genetic program, for example, creating alien-human hybrids. To do so, they might repeatedly harvest reproductive material from the same bloodlines. Monitoring successive generations allows them to observe genetic traits and perhaps even refine a lineage towards some desired outcome. Abductees often report that the aliens show keen interest in their children, sometimes even claiming, we knew you before you were born," implying they had a hand in the family line. Then there's paranormal sensitivity. Another idea is that certain families have higher innate psychic or perceptual sensitivity, making them more likely to perceive the aliens who might otherwise remain stealthy. If alien contact has a telepathic component, and indeed abductees frequently describe aliens communicating telepathically and inducing altered states, then individuals from a lineage with stronger psychic facilities could be more open to contact. Thus, the aliens themselves might be drawn to those who can interact on that level. This ties back to the concepts of a psychic gene, perhaps the same quality that makes one prone to psi experiences also makes one a better candidate for abduction phenomena. Then there's cultural or spiritual affinity. Some experiencers believe that aliens have been involved with certain human groups historically. So, for instance, an ancient relationship with the Celts or with native tribes, and thus continue to engage those descendants. This is more speculative, leaning into ancient astronaut lore. For example, claims that star beings guided early Celtic druids or Cherokee shamans, choosing their bloodlines as keepers of knowledge. While not scientifically substantiated, such beliefs are part of the narrative many experiencers use to contextualize their personal stories. Then there's Celtic and Cherokee ancestry. This is the 85% claim. Perhaps one of the most striking and controversial assertions about abductee demographics is that a very high proportion have Celtic or Native American ancestry. One widely discussed claim comes from experiencer Chris Bledsoe, who has worked with researchers and reportedly with people from the government. Bledsoe stated that he was told by a U.S. government official that 85% of all experiencers and people involved with ETs are linked to Scottish Celtic backgrounds, not English, and or Native American heritage. This statement, if true, is astonishing. It suggests that if you gather a random group of UFO abductees, the overwhelming majority would trace significant ancestry to those specific populations. Scottish and Irish Celtic lines on one hand, and Native American, often Cherokee, or other tribes on the other. Two groups that incidentally have rich traditions of mysticism, as discussed earlier. Is there evidence to back this claim? Kathleen Marden's survey provides some support. When asked about common features that attract aliens to certain people, she noted, quote, some earlier research found Celtic backgrounds or Native American Indians do get abducted more often, end quote. This suggests multiple researchers observed the trend. Marden's own data, however, pointed to an interesting twist. When she looked at blood types among abductees, she found all major blood types, O, A, and AB, represented fairly equally, with a slight skew to Rh positive, except that no one in her sample reported being blood type B. Blood type B is relatively rarer in Western European populations and Native Americans who have mostly O, and more common in Asian populations. The absence of B in her abductee sample might indirectly reflect a bias toward people of Western, European, Celtic, and Native ancestry, neither of which typically have type B in high frequency. While not conclusive, this is consistent with the idea that those ancestry groups are prevalent among experiencers. One should approach the 85% figure with caution. It may be an exaggerated or specific subset, but even qualitative reports often mention it. A MUFON researcher once informally remarked that if you attend an abductee support group, you'll find a lot of green eyes and auburn hair, stereotypical Celtic traits. Similarly, several prominent abductees or contactees have indeed had such backgrounds. Betty Hill had Scottish heritage. Whitley Strieber, as everyone here knows, is the author of Communion, had a mixed European background, possibly including Celtic. Stan Romanek, a controversial experiencer, frequently referenced Native American lineage. These anecdotal examples do not prove a rule, but they fuel the perception of a pattern. Cherokee lineage in particular comes up in UFO lore. One reason is that the high number of Americans who claim some Cherokee ancestry, a phenomenon in itself, as genealogists note many family legends of a Cherokee great-grandmother. This could statistically lead to many American abductees believing they have Cherokee blood. Another reason is cultural. The Cherokee were among tribes with stories of beings from the stars, for instance, legends of the Pleiades star cluster as the origin of some of their people. Some experiencers interpret their abductions through these cultural lenses, saying, our ancestors knew of them, we were chosen. The intertwining of heritage and experiences reinforces the individual's sense of a meaningful pattern. From a scientific standpoint, what could explain a real overrepresentation of Celtic or Cherokee ancestry among experiencers? There are a few possibilities. Could be genetic or biological factors. It's known that certain populations have distinct genetic profiles. For instance, people of Celtic descent, for example, the Basques, Irish, Highland Scots, have the highest rates of Rh negative blood in the world. There's a fringe theory that Rh negative blood is of alien origin because it's relatively rare and can cause maternal fetal incompatibility unless carefully managed. While mainstream science finds no evidence that Rh negative blood is extraterrestrial, it's explained as a mutation that became common in some isolated populations. UFO lore has embraced it as a marker. Some believe aliens favored Rh negative individuals for abduction or hybridization because of some biochemical affinity. If Celtic populations have more Rh negative, and if aliens did hypothetically prefer Rh negative, that could cause more Celtic abductees. Similarly, certain Native American lineages have unique HLA immune system markers and other genetic traits. Conceivably, if aliens track a specific gene, it might cluster in those groups. Then there's geographical and social factors. Many areas known for high UFO sightings and encounter reports, for instance, rural parts of the American South, Southwest, and West, parts of the UK, are also areas where Scots, Irish, or Celtic settlers or native communities reside. For example, in the Appalachian region, where numerous abduction stories have surfaced, a large portion of the population historically is Scots-Irish, or Ulster Scots, often intermarried with Cherokee or other tribes. Thus, ancestry and geography might be confounded. People in these communities might also share cultural frameworks that make them more likely to report and be believed about such experiences. Then, of course, there's confirmation bias. Researchers with a hypothesis might inadvertently notice evidence that fits the Celtic Cherokee pattern and overlook cases that don't. It's possible the 85% native Celtic statistic is inflated by selective sampling. A thorough demographic study of experiencers would be needed to confirm if the proportion is truly that high. Despite these caveats, the notion of targeted bloodlines persists strongly in abductee lore. Some abductees even feel pride or purpose in this, believing their lineage has been chosen for a reason, sometimes positive, like to carry on alien knowledge, sometimes dark, like being guinea pigs. On the flip side, some experience trauma at the idea that their children or future generations might also be taken. Psychologically, this belief in family targeting can exacerbate anxiety or conversely provide a coping narrative. At least I'm not alone. My family is in it together. Before leaving this topic, it's worth noting an intriguing intersection of folklore and ufology. Celtic and Native American cultures both have historical accounts of fairy abductions or spirit kidnappings that resemble modern alien abductions. For instance, Celtic fairy folklore described people being taken by fairies often midway through life or for a night that felt like years, etc. Often these stories run in families as well. The fairy doctors of Ireland sometimes came from lines reputed to have fairy contact. Some scholars, like Jacques Vallée, have suggested that UFO abductions are a modern manifestation of a timeless phenomenon, simply interpreted through a new lens. If so, perhaps certain families were abductee families in past centuries too, but back then they framed it as being chosen by fairies or spirits, and today as aliens. This hypothesis again circles back to inherited propensity. Maybe certain individuals have the psychic sensitivity or altered state propensity to experience these encounters, and those individuals tended to come from particular gene pools or cultural milieus. In summary, ufology evidence suggests non-random distribution of abduction experiences among family lineages, particularly highlighting Celtic and Native American, often Cherokee ancestry as common factors. Whether this is due to genetic predisposition, cultural narrative, or direct alien selection remains an open question. The next section will explore possible mechanisms behind these patterns, weighing genetic theories, the psychic gene, or other heritable factors against psychological and cultural explanations that might make an experiencer. All right, let me just take a breather for a second, make sure that people can still hear me and all that good stuff. Okay, based on a quick half a second view of comments. All right, looks like everything is working. So I'm just going to keep pushing because, again, there's a lot here. All right, then there's cultural transmission versus genetic transmission. Is it nature or nurture? Up to this point, we have presented evidence that both psychic abilities and abduction experiences tend to cluster in families, but clustering alone does not prove genetics. Families also share environments, beliefs, and stories. This raises a core issue. Are these traits being passed down biologically, i.e. nature, or socially, nurture? In this section, we disentangle the influences of cultural transmission and psychological conditioning from those of genetic inheritance, recognizing that reality may involve elements of both. So first, there's the role of belief and expectation. A child born into a family of ardent UFO believers or practicing psychics will grow up with a ready-made framework for unusual experiences. Anthropologists note that in societies with strong belief in spirits or magic, individuals who have hallucinations or anomalous perceptions are quickly integrated into a shamanic narrative, whereas in a secular society, the same perceptions might be dismissed or pathologized. Similarly, if a parent frequently discusses their own abduction experience, A child might internalize that narrative so deeply that any nighttime terror or odd dream is interpreted as "it's happening to me now." This is not to say the child is lying, rather, their imaginative and interpretive processes have been primed by the family lore. Cultural researchers often mention the concept of culture bound experiences. For example, sleep paralysis is a universal physiological phenomenon, a state where one wakes up temporarily unable to move, often accompanied by a sense of presence or frightening hallucinations. Different cultures explain it in their own terms. In Japan, it's a vengeful spirit. In parts of Nigeria, a demon pressing on one's chest. In modern America, often gray aliens at the bedside. Thus, a family's cultural background can determine whether a child who experiences sleep paralysis will later say, "I was attacked by a witch," or "I was abducted by aliens." A recent review noted people rely on personally plausible cultural narratives to interpret these otherwise puzzling episodes of sleep paralysis. The UFO abduction narrative has certainly become one such culturally available script since the 1960s. Then there's psychological traits and heritability. Some psychological characteristics that predispose people to paranormal or abduction claims are known to be partially heritable. For instance, hypnotizability and absorption. The tendency to enter trance states easily, become absorbed in imagination, and have rich fantasy lives as a genetic component. Abductees often score high on absorption and related measures. If a parent is fantasy prone or highly hypnotizable, their child might inherit some of that cognitive style, through genes or by imitation. This could make the child more likely to experience vivid imagery or even spontaneously recall abduction scenarios, especially under hypnosis, where suggestibility plays a role. Then there's dissociation. The propensity to dissociate, to feel detached from reality, or to compartmentalize memory can be both a result of trauma and a trait that runs in families. Abduction experiencers often show higher dissociative tendencies, which might make them more open to alternative realities or less anchored to consensus reality. Some research suggests a neurological basis for dissociation that could be inheritable. For example, differences in connective structures of the brain. Then there's openness to unusual ideas, magical ideation. Personality research places openness to experience as a trait with about 40 to 60% heritability. Abductees often endorse New Age or non-mainstream beliefs, for instance, astrology, holistic healing, existence of ghosts. If parents hold such beliefs strongly, children inherit both the genes that might correlate with openness and the environment rich in those ideas, a double influence. This synergy can produce generations of believers. And there's anxiety and nightmares. There's evidence that sleep disorders, nightmare frequency, and certain anxiety profiles have genetic links. If a predisposition to vivid nightmares or night terrors runs in a family, one generation's nightmares might be medieval demons and the next generation's aliens. A different content on the same predisposed canvas. And there's trauma in family systems. It's notable that many abductees and psychics report significant trauma in childhood, sometimes unrelated, so for instance, abuse or loss, and sometimes as part of the paranormal narrative, like frightening abduction events as a child. Trauma can have intergenerational effects that are not strictly genetic, but can mimic inheritance through behaviors and even epigenetics. For example, a parent with unresolved trauma might create a tense family environment. Interestingly, sociologist Greeley found that those reporting frequent psychic experiences often came from families with high tension or conflict during their upbringing. Some psychologists theorize that childhood trauma leads to dissociation, which then leads to reports of psychic or alien experiences, essentially as a coping or imaginative escape. Indeed, one study showed that people with childhood sexual abuse histories are more likely to report odd experiences, possibly because they dissociate or have nightmares that get interpreted in paranormal ways. However, research by Tony Lawrence, 1995, found something intriguing. While trauma was linked to increased reports of psychic experiences, it was not fully mediated by fantasy proneness. In other words, traumatized individuals reported more paranormal experiences, even beyond what would be expected if it was just imagination. This leaves open a question. Could trauma sometimes act as a trigger for genuine psi perceptions? Or does it simply make one more likely to accept paranormal interpretations? Some parapsychologists, like Darrell Bem, have speculated that extreme stress might thin the veil of consciousness, perhaps analogous to how some shamans undergo severe trials and emerge claiming enhanced vision. From a family perspective, trauma can be passed down. There's emerging evidence in epigenetics that severe stress can cause chemical marks on genes that are inherited, affecting how descendants respond to stress, though this is still a nascent field. One could speculate fancifully that a lineage that has experienced collective traumas might, generation after generation, produce individuals with heightened alertness to threats, maybe even hypervigilance during sleep that could manifest as abduction scenarios. Then there's the skeptical perspective, the psychosocial argument. Many skeptical scholars propose that alien abductions and perhaps even reports of psychic powers are primarily psychosocial constructs, phenomena created by the interaction of individuals' psychology with cultural narratives. According to this view, family patterns don't require any gene. They are simply the result of families sharing stories and reinforcing beliefs. For example, philosopher Robert Schaefer and psychologist Susan Clancy have pointed out that popular media, books, and films spread the abduction narrative widely by the 1980s so that anyone experiencing a weird night terror might latch on to that explanation. If one family member, say a mother, publicly interprets her nightmare as an abduction, a suggestible child might later unconsciously follow suit upon having a scary dream rather than saying there was a monster under my bed. Supporting this detailed psychological testing of self-identified abductees by Harvard researchers McNally et al. Found that they were, in general, psychologically normal, but had a suite of specific traits that could foster false memories. They tended to have more false memory susceptibility, recalling words or items in tests that weren't there, experience sleep paralysis with hypnopompic hallucinations, and then interpret them in an abduction framework, and also score high in absorption and creative imagination, as noted, and then be very familiar with UFO lore, sometimes obsessively so, fueling a cycle where reading more makes them interpret more experiences as abductions. None of those traits necessarily passes genetically in a straightforward way. They could just as easily be learned or coincidental. But could some be genetic? Possibly. The tendency for sleep paralysis is partly genetic. Sleep patterns are influenced by genetics. Memory quirks also have some genetic basis in cognitive science. So again, we see it's not black and white, nature versus nurture. It's an interplay. Then there's intergenerational influence. It may help to illustrate how nature and nurture might jointly produce an experiencer in a hypothetical family. A grandmother in the 1940s, before alien abductions were known as a concept, has episodes of sleep paralysis and also possesses a naturally high ability for vivid dreams. Again, a genetic trait. She interprets her experience in terms of ghosts or maybe fairy folklore, which is a cultural influence over time and Celtic heritage. Her daughter inherits the vivid dream tendency and also grows up hearing ghost stories from mom, the environment. In the 1960s, the daughter encounters the burgeoning UFO literature, for instance, reading about the Betty and Barney Hill case. And when she has an episode of sleep paralysis, her imagery skews toward aliens instead of ghosts. She undergoes hypnosis, perhaps after seeing a TV show about it, and recovers an abduction memory. This reinforces her belief, and she becomes actively involved in UFO groups, often discussing it at home. Her son, in turn, inherits a tendency to anxiety and sleep issues, part genetic, and is raised in a household where aliens are at a dinner table, which is the environment. He internalizes that framework deeply. During puberty, a time of neurological and sleep changes, he experiences intense hypnagogic hallucinations and missing time episodes, which he immediately interprets as abductions because that's the narrative he knows. He might also exhibit some psychic flashes, which the family encourages as part of the program. Your grandmother had the gift too, for instance. By adulthood, he is thoroughly convinced he is an experiencer, and perhaps he actually joins the ranks of those who, under hypnosis or in dreams, recall multiple abductions, possibly more than actually occurred in a literal sense. In this scenario, each generation was born with some predispositions, so for instance, vivid imagination, anxiety, etc., but is also made into an experiencer by the familial and cultural context. To complicate things, if we consider for a moment the possibility that some paranormal phenomena are real, then a person who is more open or predisposed might actually be more likely to genuinely encounter them. For instance, if telepathy exists, maybe only those with a certain brain wiring, potentially genetic, can effectively transmit receive, thus it would show as a familial ability. Or if UFO intelligences are choosing people, perhaps they do gravitate toward those with certain bloodline markers, genetic, or simply those who pay attention, cultural. The truth could be a feedback loop. An inherent trait leads to an experience, which leads to a belief, which leads to more experience, and so on. In families, that loop can continue across generations. In conclusion, cultural and psychological transmission can explain a large portion of familial patterns in psychic and UFO phenomena. Shared beliefs, narratives, and learned cognitive styles strongly influence who becomes an experiencer, yet genetic predispositions are likely intertwined. Genes that shape our brains and personality can make one more or less likely to perceive the world in a way that accommodates the paranormal. Thus, the nature versus nurture dichotomy breaks down. Both are contributing. Abductees and psychics might be born with certain propensities and then made into experiencers through life's influence. This sets the stage for examining specific theories of how such heritable transmission might work, which we address next in terms of mechanisms from genes and blood chemistry to possible paranormal inheritance. Theories of mechanism. How could traits and encounters be passed on? If we entertain the possibility that something inherent is being transmitted in experiencer families, we must ask, what exactly is being passed down, and how might it operate? Several not mutually exclusive mechanisms have been proposed or speculated upon in various fields. Here we explore these mechanisms from the conventional to the speculative, always grounding them in whether any evidence exists. First, there are specific genetic markers. The most direct mechanism is that certain genes or combinations of genes increase the likelihood of psychic abilities or of having the kind of neurological profile that fosters abduction experiences. As reviewed earlier, one candidate is on chromosome 7, TNRC 18 region, where a variant was found in non-psychics but not in psychics. Another speculative marker often mentioned is the Rh negative blood factor. Rh negative is determined by genes on chromosome 1 that result in the absence of the D antigen on red blood cells. Some authors, like Nick Redfern in Bloodline of the Gods, have argued that Rh negative people exhibit higher rates of psychic phenomena and alien encounters. The logic is often anecdotal, pointing out that the Basque and Celtic populations with high Rh negatives have many lore of second sight, and that a disproportionate number of abductees claim Rh negative blood. While robust statistical evidence is lacking, this idea has popular traction. The mechanism theorized is that perhaps Rh negative blood has different electrical conductivity or is a sign of an older, unique lineage that certain otherworldly forces monitor. Mainstream science finds nothing paranormal about Rh negative. It's likely a mutation that confers some immunity advantage. Still, if future surveys found a real correlation between Rh negativity and experiencers, it would warrant investigation. Other genetic avenues might include genes affecting neurotransmitters, for instance, variants in serotonin or dopamine receptors that could influence perception and hallucination. There is even an interesting line in the Miller text that a variant of a serotonin-related gene might protect some people from negative effects of childhood abuse, possibly enabling them to channel it into psychic awareness instead. It is speculative, but suggests that something molecular could differentiate how experiences manifest, PTSD versus ESP, say. Then there's epigenetic inheritance. Epigenetics refers to changes in gene expression through chemical markers that can sometimes be passed to offspring without altering the DNA code. Some have posited that if a parent undergoes a profound psychic awakening or repeated anomalous experiences, the stress or changes associated with that might imprint epigenetically. For example, there's evidence extreme trauma can cause epigenetic changes that are seen in children, such as descendants of Holocaust survivors showing markers on stress-related genes. If encountering a UFO or having an abduction is a deeply stressful event, which most abductees say it is, theoretically it could leave epigenetic marks. Those might heighten sensitivity or anxiety in offspring, indirectly making them more prone to similar experiences or interpretations. This area remains hypothetical for now. No one has studied epigenetics in experience or families, but it's a bridge between environment and heredity that could be relevant. Then there's neural anatomical inheritance. Certain structural brain features are inherited. For instance, the hippocampus size, the amygdala reactivity, or temporal lobe structure can run in families. If mediums or abductees have, say, a notably thin boundary between sleep and wake states, perhaps due to easily shifting brain waves or weaker thalamocortical filters, that could be anatomical or functional in the brain and thus passed to kin. A much discussed concept is the filter theory of consciousness, the idea that the brain usually filters out psi or spiritual input, but in some people that filter is looser. One could envision that trait being inheritable. For instance, fewer of certain inhibitory neurons. If your mother's brain let more information through, resulting in psychic visions, maybe yours will too. This aligns with some parapsychological theories that everyone is born with potential psi, but most have a psychic suppressant, whether cultural or biological, turned on. The genetic study hinting that a mutation might suppress psi fits that notion. Mechanistically, one might find in the future a gene that affects, say, the limbic system connectivity, and thereby the propensity to experience transliminal phenomena. Then there's learned techniques and reinforcement. On the nurture side, but creating something akin to a legacy, are learned skills. Families might pass down actual techniques that enhance experiences. For example, a grandmother teaches her granddaughter meditation or certain rituals to attract spirit contact, effectively training her in becoming an experiencer. Other generations, or over generations, these practices could refine. In some Cherokee families, one might pass down knowledge of specific herbs or fasting rituals that induce visions. In Celtic families, maybe certain divination practices, reading tea leaves, scrying with mirrors, are taught early. These create a mechanism for making an experiencer through education. The key point is that because it's kept within families, it can appear hereditary. Indeed, when mediums or witches were persecuted historically, often whole families or covens were targeted, reinforcing the idea that it runs in the family, when in fact it was a clandestine craft taught within the family. Then there could be NHI or external selection. From a ufological perspective, one radical mechanism is external. If we hypothesize that aliens are real and actively choosing whom to abduct or communicate with, then it could be their decision to stick with certain bloodlines. Perhaps once they've taken a parent, they implant something, a device, a tracking mechanism that also influences the child. Some abductees report that their children were abducted as young as toddlers. One could imagine the child's inclusion is simply because the aliens keep tabs on the family unit. Another idea in UFO lore is that some humans carry alien DNA from ancient interbreeding, a motif popularized by shows like Ancient Aliens. If, say, Celtic and some native lineages had an alien DNA infusion centuries ago, modern aliens might find those individuals biologically more compatible or easier to communicate with telepathically. While this is speculative and not supported by conventional evidence, it is a mechanism often believed by experiencers themselves, giving them a sense of identity. Quote, I am part alien, which is why I have these powers experiences. Then there's psychic networks and egregores. In some esoteric circles, there's the notion of group minds or family souls. Some mystics claim that psychic abilities can be shared or amplified within a family due to a kind of group consciousness. If one family member opens a channel to some phenomenon, others connected by emotional and genetic bonds might more easily slip into that channel too. This is more metaphysical than scientific, but it echoes the documented phenomenon in parapsychology of experimenter effects, where some researchers consistently get psi results in the lab and others don't, as if a person's influence matters. Perhaps families that accept and practice psi form a kind of positive feedback loop of belief and psychic energy that makes anomalous events more frequent around them, a blend of psychological priming and maybe paranormal encouragement. In UFO abductee support groups, members often remark how, when they meet, high strangeness tends to occur. For instance, odd lights in the sky on the way home, etc., suggesting that collective focus might somehow correlate with phenomena. If a family is essentially a small, very tight-knit support group, often with shared genes, they might similarly manifest more phenomena. Bringing these possibilities back to reality, we must admit that no single mechanism has empirical proof as the cause of inherited paranormal experiences. However, research does lend credence to parts. So, for instance, biological differences like in-brain functions or genetic markers exist between those who report psychic abilities and those who don't. Psychological traits are also known to be influenced by genes like absorption, synesthesia, or anxiety, and they correlate with being an experiencer. Then there's cultural continuity, which clearly shapes how experiences are interpreted and even, or how experiences are interpreted and even the likelihood of seeking them. Children encouraged to use the site will likely report more psychic visions than those told it's nonsense. One might propose a multifactorial model. The propensity to have anomalous experiences or to interpret experiences anomalously is a heritable trait influenced by many genes, each giving a slight push, plus an upbringing that either strengthens or weakens that propensity. For instance, an individual might inherit a genetic cocktail that makes them imaginative, prone to sleep paralysis, and neurologically open to hallucination. If raised in a materialist, disbelieving home, they might become a novelist or artist and never think of aliens. If raised in an experiencer family, they become the next abductee or renowned psychic medium. Finally, it's worth noting the implications of each mechanism if true. If a gene or psychic profile were definitively identified, it could revolutionize understanding of consciousness, perhaps validating some fringe science. If, on the other hand, it's mostly nurture, then interventions like education and counseling could potentially prevent distressing experiences by reframing them. Many abductees suffer PTSD-like symptoms. If their children could be taught early on that nightmares are just nightmares, maybe they'd avoid the abduction interpretation and its trauma. Conversely, if one believes the experiences are valuable or real contact, one might want to enhance transmission. For instance, families teaching their kids how to safely navigate psychic or contact experiences, treating it almost like inheriting a special talent that needs honing. The next section will touch on how official institutions have reacted to these ideas of inherited psi or contact, and then we will conclude by synthesizing our findings on whether experiences are born or made. So there's government and scientific perspectives, from Project Blue Book to Project Stargate. It is instructive to see how establishment organizations, scientific bodies, and government agencies have viewed claims of psychic abilities and alien encounters, particularly any notion of their heritability. This not only provides historical context, but also highlights the tension between mainstream skepticism and the persistent fringe. Project Blue Book and scientific rejection of heritable UFO traits. Project Blue Book was the U.S. Air Force's official study of UFOs from 1952 to 1969. During Blue Book's tenure, the focus was on unidentified flying objects seen in the sky, not on abductions. Abduction reports were rare and not taken seriously by most officials. The Hill case was considered an anomaly, possibly explained by psychological factors. Blue Book ended with the Condon Report in 1968, concluding that further study of UFOs was not likely to yield scientific value. In those years, any idea of abductee bloodlines would have been far outside the scope. If anything, Blue Book typified the scientific skepticism of the era. UFO witnesses were often assumed to be misidentifying objects or fabricating stories, and any patterns, like multiple family members seeing UFOs, might be attributed to shared environment or hoaxing. The notion of inherited predisposition to encounter aliens would likely have been dismissed by scientists as introducing unnecessary mysticism. However, with the abduction phenomenon rising in the 1980s, some academic researchers did take a look. Harvard's Dr. John Mack gave credence to the idea that abductions were subjectively real for experiencers and found many had family histories of encounters, but he explored it more from a transpersonal psychology angle than a genetic one. Others, like Dr. Elizabeth Slater, did psychological profiles of abductee families, finding them generally stable, but with some unusual dynamics. Sometimes the child seemed to subconsciously role-play the parents' abduction narrative, etc. The consensus in academia leaned toward psychosocial explanations, as detailed earlier in McNally's work. There was essentially no mainstream scientific research into genetic or lineage aspects of abductions. That territory was left to ufologists and the experiencers themselves. Then there was military and intelligence interest in psi, and the implicit belief in gifted individuals. In contrast to the scientific dismissal of UFO contact claims, part of the U.S. government did spend considerable time and money on psychic research, suggesting a belief that some people naturally have extraordinary abilities. The Stargate project, known under various code names as it evolved, Scan8, Grillflame, Sunstreak, etc., ran from the 1970s through 1995. Initially motivated by reports of Soviet psychic programs, the U.S. effort at SRI, the Stanford Research Institute, began by testing gifted individuals like Ingo Swann and Pat Price. These were men reported to have innate clairvoyant talent. The fact that the program had sought out such individuals, including some recruited from the Church of Scientology, which had an interest in psychic phenomena, implies they believed talent mattered. Indeed, an army unit was later formed with soldiers who were believed to possess varying degrees of natural psychic ability. Those who showed promise were trained further. The idea of training anyone in remote viewing came later, but even then it was acknowledged not everyone reached high accuracy, hinting at individual differences. While Stargate's documents don't explicitly mention heredity, one might imagine that if a remote viewer had a child with similar traits, they might have been interested. However, due to confidentiality and the relatively short span of someone's career in the program, we don't have public data on multi-generational psychics in Stargate. The program ended with a CIA-commissioned review by the American Institute for Research in 1995, which concluded that though some results were statistically significant, remote viewers were not reliable for intelligence use. The program was shut down. In doing so, the government publicly essentially disowned the idea that these abilities were useful, but quietly they had validated that they thought such abilities exist in some people enough to invest in it for 2 decades. Elsewhere in government, the CIA and other agencies also looked into exceptional human performance and phenomenon like telepathic communication. Declassified documents show various experiments, including attempts to see if psychics could influence RNGs, which are random number generators, or if certain individuals, like famed Israeli psychic Uri Geller, truly had abilities. While often inconclusive, they do indicate a sustained interest in the human factor, that is, the possibility of latent faculties in the human mind that only some exhibit strongly. What about ufology-related government interest? This is murkier. Officially, after Blue Book, there was no public government UFO study until recently, with the Pentagon's ATIP program acknowledging UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena research. But credible insiders and documents suggest that agencies did quietly collect data on encounters. For instance, a DIA-sponsored program in the 2000s, ALSAP, associated with Robert Bigelow's BASS, reportedly studied a range of paranormal phenomena, including poltergeists and effects on ranch families. So that's the Skinwalker Ranch story. In the book Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, the authors, including a former DIA insider, describe how investigators visiting a paranormal hotspot later had bizarre happenings at home, affecting their families, a so-called hitchhiker effect. It implies that even being around phenomena could extend it to family members. If such reports were taken seriously by DIA, they might have contemplated that certain people or families become carriers of weird phenomena. This, again, is not exactly genetics, but it rhymes with the idea of predisposition, maybe not innate, but acquired and then shared by proximity. The CIA also explored transmission of belief and thought in programs like MKUltra, though that infamously deals more with drugs and hypnosis. Hypnosis is relevant. It can create false memories or unlock real ones, and susceptibility to hypnosis can be inheritable. If agencies used hypnosis in witness interrogations or to evaluate abductees, some accounts claim the Air Force did hypnotize certain abductees to get information, like in the famous Betty and Barney Hill debriefs. They might have quietly noted the family patterns. Another relevant angle is remote viewing for UFOs. It's rumored that some Stargate psychics attempted to remote view extraterrestrials or alien technology. If that occurred, it merges the two domains of psi and UFOs, reinforcing a possible connection that if you have the gift, you might perceive aliens clairvoyantly, which some experiencers claim they do. On the scientific front, outside of government, the academic study of parapsychology has long been marginalized, but not non-existent. Reputable institutions like Duke University in the mid-20th century with J.B. Rhine's lab have studied ESP. Any findings on heredity were modest. Rhine noted occasional family patterns as card guessing tests, but nothing definitive. By and large, the scientific establishment requires repeatable, controlled evidence, which neither psi nor UFO abductions have delivered to a satisfying degree. Genetic studies like Wabe's are so new that most scientists remain unaware or unconvinced. In summary, the official perspective historically ranges from skeptical to cautiously intrigued. The Air Force and Blue Book times likely would have laughed at the notion of a psychic gene or abductee lineage. Yet simultaneously, secret programs were hunting for those very anomalies or psychic spies. This dichotomy shows how controversial and outlier these topics are. In recent years, there's a slight thaw. Mainstream journals have occasionally published psi research, and the U.S. Navy and Pentagon have openly acknowledged pilots encountering something unexplained in the skies. If academic science were to seriously consider heritability of anomalous experiences, it would require robust data. Perhaps large-scale genomic studies or psychological surveys of experiencers versus controls could be done in the future. Until then, this topic lives in a liminal space, not fully accepted but not entirely dismissed by all. The government's interest in remote viewers indicates they believe some abilities can be rare and special, analogous to a rare talent like being an Olympic athlete, which is also partly genetic. On the other hand, their discontinuation of those programs hints at limits or inconsistency in those abilities. An interesting footnote: in 2020, the U.S. Army partnered with TTSA, to the Stars Academy, a private research group researching exotic technologies, including consciousness, to study material allegedly from UFOs. Part of the broader conversation includes whether human consciousness is a factor in UFO experiences. If so, it begs the question if certain consciousness traits, maybe genetically influenced, are necessary to witness or interact with phenomena. We see a return of the notion that the phenomena might choose the percipients, and those percipients might share something inherent. Having traversed folklore, research, psychological theory, and official stance, we can now gather our conclusions. The final section will synthesize these insights and answer: are abductees and experiencers born with their proclivities, or are they made by circumstance? Or, as evidence suggests, a bit of both. So, are abductees and experiencers born or made? After examining the tapestry of evidence and perspectives, the most honest answer is both, and it's complicated. There's no simple psychic gene that has been discovered to account for generational patterns of paranormal encounters. Yet, neither can we attribute everything purely to environment and imagination. Given the suggestive familial tendencies and the elusive scientific hints of biological differences. From a cross-disciplinary vantage point, several conclusions emerge. First, familial patterns are real. Numerous case studies and surveys confirm that reports of psychic phenomena and alien abductions often cluster in families, sometimes across multiple generations. Whether it's Scottish second sight or UFO abductions in an American family, the recurrence is too frequent to ignore. This lends some credence to the notion of inherent predispositions, though it does not specify the mechanisms. For instance, genetic versus cultural. Second, cultural context shapes expression. These predispositions, whatever their origin, seem heavily channeled by culture. Celtic and Cherokee lineage prominence among experiencers likely reflects not only any genetic factors, but also rich cultural traditions that validate and frame extraordinary experiences. In cultures or families that embrace the paranormal, members feel freer to experience or at least report such phenomena. Thus, nurture amplifies nature. A born potential can lie dormant without the made aspect of belief and support. Third, psychology provides a template. Traits like high creativity, hypnotic suggestibility, dissociation, and propensity for anomalous perception can be inherited, and these in turn correlate with being an experiencer. In many cases, what appears as a familial psychic gift could alternatively be explained as a familial psychic profile or psychological profile. Notably, these traits by themselves are not pathological. Most abductees are otherwise healthy, sane individuals. The difference is in interpretation of experiences, which is guided by mental frameworks often learned within the family. Fourth, scientific evidence of genetic influence is emergent but tentative. The pilot genetic study by Wabe, etc., in 2021 offers a tantalizing clue that genetics may play a role in psychic ability by identifying a gene region possibly linked to suppressing psi. While far from conclusive, it cracks open the door for future research. If psychic functioning has some biological basis, it is plausible that whatever allows certain people to see UFOs or experience abductions, perhaps greater sensitivity to magnetic fields or ability to enter altered states, might also have biological underpinnings. There is also no known abductee gene, but one could hypothesize that, for example, genes affecting threat response or sleep paralysis frequently could make abduction narratives more likely. Fifth, experiential reality versus induced belief. For those who have these extraordinary experiences, the question of more born or made is not just academic, it relates to legitimacy. Many experiencers feel their perceptions are real in a way that transcends both genetics and upbringing. A psychic might say they inherited a true gift, a literal sixth sense, not just a tendency for imagination. An abductee might insist their encounters happened in the physical world, not in a dream or due to family folklore. Science may lean towards viewing these as made via psychological constructs, but the experiential perspective often leans toward born chosen. In evaluating the truth, we must acknowledge this subjective reality. It is real to them. Thus, even if one could show a strong genetic link, it would not diminish their lived experience. Conversely, showing a psychological influence doesn't prove the experience false, but contextualizes them. Sixth, the heritability of belief. Interestingly, belief systems themselves are passed down almost like cultural genes or memes. If one generation firmly believes in the paranormal, they effectively pass that on, which in turn predisposes the next generation to interpret events in that light. In abductee and psychic families, belief and experience reinforce one another cyclically. In scientific terms, one could say the phenotype, observable trait we see, say a family of psychics, is a result of some unknown genotype and a cultural genotype of belief. The interplay makes it hard to isolate cause and effect. So are abductees and experiencers born or made? They are born with a certain potential, whether that's neurological, genetic, or temperament, and made into actual experiencers by a fertile environment of belief, support, and often specific triggers. Remove either element, and the phenomenon might not manifest in the same way. A person with all the genetic markings of a psychic, but raised in a strictly rationalist, dismissive home, might never identify as a psychic. A person with no particular innate edge, but raised in a spiritualist household, might develop functional psychic skills through practice. Most compelling cases likely involve some of both, a latent ability activated by circumstance. Crucially, our examination also suggests the need for critical evaluation of each claim. Patterns like Celtic ancestry among abductees could result from biases in reporting or collecting data. We must differentiate between correlation and causation. Just because many abductees are Celtic or Cherokee does not inherently mean ancestry causes abduction. Alternative explanations like socio-demographics of UFO reporters or intermarriage leading to that mix must be tested. For scientific and scholarly communities, this topic invites an interdisciplinary approach. Geneticists, psychologists, anthropologists, and even sociologists could collaborate to study experiencer families in depth, mapping genomes, personality, and belief systems. Such holistic study is rare due to stigma, but it could yield insights into how human experience works at the margins of the unknown. For the public and experiencers themselves, recognizing the blend of nature and nurture might be empowering. It validates that they aren't simply crazy or solely products of fantasy. There may be inborn differences that set them apart, but it also suggests that experiences are not immutable destiny. Environment and interpretation play a huge role. This means interventions are possible. For instance, counseling could help reframe traumatic abduction memories. Meditation could hone a psychic gift that a gene only weakly bestowed, etc. In closing, the metaphor of a psychic gene in our title can be seen as both a literal query and a symbolic one. Literal answer: no single psychic gene is known, but genetic factors likely contribute to paranormal experiences. Symbolic answer: the psychic gene could be a lineage of tradition and openness passed down through families. Are experiencers born or made? They are born with the seed and made by the soil in which that seed is planted. The thriving of that seed, whether it becomes a blossoming intuitive talent or a nightmarish encounter, depends on a confluence of hereditary threads and experiential weaving. Future research may further illuminate these threads. Until then, the stories of Celtic seers and Cherokee visionaries and mothers and daughters taken by the stars and of laboratories finding strange mutations all point to one poetic truth. Human experience is both deeply embedded in our biology and wonderfully sculpted by our culture. The mystery of the psychic gene, much like the UFOs themselves, challenges us to broaden our understanding of the interplay between our genes, our minds, and the vast unknown. All right, that's it. And that's all, folks. Sweet Lord, that was long. I think I'm like going blind after that. Ugh. All right, let's get to the comments, which seem to be vast. So I am way behind. All right. Yeah, thanks, Logan. Yeah, we're almost there, Solite US expat. Almost there. All right, Arizona Raven is saying hi, I'm listening. And then Scott Ian is hello, Scott. Roger Claiborne saying my grandmother was also very psychic, but didn't talk to spirits. She saw and ignored them. I saw some of the spirits myself, and I'm sometimes pretty psychic, but not regularly. My sister is, though. Perhaps it does run in some families. If it wasn't for my paranormal experiences around my grandmother as a kid, I too would find them hard to believe. When my mom joined the Navy and we moved, it all went away, though. Well, that's unfortunate. Yeah, Hillbilly Herb is saying Celtic ancestry and childhood trauma definitely gives you superpowers. Laugh out loud. Roger Claiborne says, but they seem to draw near when my sister or I call upon them, which we don't do anymore. So Roger Claiborne is saying I'm mostly Scots-Irish and my great-grandfather was Scottish. Oracle of Ralphie is saying I'm reacting to this live on TikTok. Wait, I'm not even on TikTok. How are you seeing this on TikTok? Are you just like TikTok? I don't know. I'm thinking of starting a TikTok channel now that the Chinese don't own it anymore, allegedly. So, but that's more for another day. Hey, Spiritual Ascension, good to see you. All right, so Roger Claiborne saying got some German and English in me as well, though. Hillbilly Herb is saying second sight, quote, interesting. Yeah, Gray Owl, it is, yes. Gray Owl is chiding everyone for being late. Just don't let it happen again. Oracle of Relphi says star people from other worlds. So Gray Owl is saying the Gray Owl is half Scottish and other half Scottish. I was given two middle names, Robert and Bruce, which are the names of my two Scotsman grandpappies, but of course. Also the name of the King of Scots, Robert the Bruce. Not trying to talk about myself here. Just wanted to give the background of my Scottish roots. So people might understand why I hate everything and everyone. It's a Scottish thing. So Roger Claiborne saying, according to my grandmother, she saw the spirits. My great grandmother talked too, but was afraid of them, even though her mother told her there was nothing to fear from. Gray Owl writes, Dean Radin had a really good interview on Whitley Strieber's broadcast. Yeah, I'm talking to Dean Radin in late December. Okay, so Solite, yeah, US Expert is just saying, oh, good, I wanted to hear more about Dean Radin's book. So Gray Owl saying, Radin thinks he has a map of how to use RNA sequences to enhance people's psi abilities temporarily. Okay, Gray Owl said also he has conducted a study that indicates that there is a small subset of individuals that have no psyche. Yep, and most of them have ancestry from the former Holy Roman Empire. And why do they have no psi abilities? Because they executed witches, basically. Yeah, Spanish Inquisition and all that stuff. Is who hiring? Oracle Ralphie. Hey, Benton. Good to see you. You like disappeared for a little bit there. I think we were trading emails. I can't remember who sent the last one, and then you went dark for a while. I know you went to Japan, but anyway, good to see you, man. Yeah. Roger Claiborne says, well, when you get multiple people seeing the same unhuman spirit at the same time, you know it's not a brain defect. Yeah. All right, I'm just racing through. So James Eagle saying, very interesting. Some of these things run in my family were Native Americans, Dakota Sioux. Interesting. Philip P. Blair saying, help your mommy find the cars and I'll get ice cream. Where are mommy's keys, honey? It's not a bad idea. All right, again, Philip Blair writes in a recent video put out by the Dalai Lama's people on social media showing him meeting with Dr. Richard Davidson in India, the Dalai Lama appeared to be suffering cognitive decline. Well, that's unfortunate. Roger Claiborne is saying, I suspect I have the ability to call spirits and even get them to do stuff, but I'm just now realizing this. My sister definitely can, but doesn't anymore now that she's Christian and not pagan. Okay. Roger Claiborne says she says Jesus told her she doesn't need them and she should rely upon him instead. So that is what she now does. Okay. So Solite US Expat is saying Jason Giorgiani was on Jesse Michaels' show again 2 or 3 weeks ago. And he spoke about what Lynn Buchanan told him. Lynn met some Nordic hybrids who spoke to him. He was told by them that these Nordics hybrids live in small towns in Colorado, and most of their children don't even know where they are really from. Yikes. Oops. Rogum babies, freaks of nature. Oracle of Ralphi is saying. Okay, so Roger Claiborne is saying, wow, this explains a lot about my past paranormal experimentation and experiences. We got this blood as well. Gray Owl says Raiden was saying that in contrast to subset of people with no psi because of the Spanish Inquisition. Yep. Miss Tasha 217 is saying has B negative blood, and I see orbs about once a week. Oh wow. Dr. Paul Philip P. Blair is writing. Dr. Paul Ekman passed 2 days ago. He was a psychology researcher and professor in the SF Bay Area too, though nothing to do with SRI. Oh, okay. I thought. Sorry, I've done a lot of reading out loud tonight, so my eyes are like getting destroyed. Roger Claiborne is saying I'm not hypnotizable. Okay, so Miss Tasha is saying I have never been hypnotized, but I'm hyper vigilant and I just don't know that it would work on me, maybe. So Tim Beck is saying cultural and semantics, epistemology, philology, entomology. Oh, nice comment, Timbo. Yep, Lynn Buchanan, psi abilities. He's an abductee. Hey, Woo Riders DG. He says, hello, Sean. Hope you and your family are doing great. God bless you to all. Okay, so Miss Tasha is saying, yes, I've been doing the gateway process for a while. I'm on the second to last CD, probably about a year now. So Oracle of Relphi is saying, I'm a big fan of Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication. Okay, so Miss Tasha is saying, and I lose the dream, but I have not had an out of body, but I'm trying. So Roger Claiborne is saying, I was attacked by an evil spirit as a child, but another spirit came and drove it off. I believe the spirit was trying to, I'm not going to say that word, to end me because it pressed down and pawed all over me. And Roger Claiborne said, I heard heavy breathing as well. Miss Tasha says, sometimes I can't sleep all night, but I just try to say it is what it is. Usually that works. Sometimes my mind goes wild. Tim Beck says, I have moments, usually creative, conscious dreams, weird. Okay, so Miss Tasha says, okay, I'm screenshotting that too, or screen shooting that too. I'm on a mission to make the most of my life. All right, Roger Claiborne saying I was 4 or 5 when I first started. I screamed a monster was in my room, and my mom and dad burst in, and it stopped. Dad didn't believe me and threatened to whip me if I did it again. Huh. Conversations on compassion with Paul Ekman, Natasha. It's a great interview during Q&A. At the end, Dr. Philip Zimbardo asked one of the questions, and he's the guy who oversaw the infamous Stanford prison experiment. Uh, um, I like my wife was in the I think it's like Psi Chi Honor Society at Stanford for psychology. So like all those students got to go to Zimbardo's house in Stanford, like way back when. He's a creepy dude. Okay, so Roger Claiborne said after he shut the door, the spirit came back and attacked me again. That's when another spirit came and drove the evil one away. Yeah, it's an yeah. So Miss Tasha says interesting. The prison experiment should be known by all. Yeah, sorry folks. I'm just trying to get through this stuff relatively quickly because there's a lot. Okay, so Philip Blair is writing. I keep procrastinating doing a dream journal. I thought. Let me give you some advice, Philip. I basically started one. It's my Substack. Like it's literally my Substack. I mean, it's not basically if I see owls and take pictures of them or record them on video, I post those and then I post any weird dreams that I have. And that's my dream journal. So just monetize your dream journal and it will, although I literally make $0 on Substack because anybody can read my stuff. Now what I'm doing is I'm just posting these things and then at about a month they go into the paid section. So like the backlog goes into paid, but like all the new stuff, if you're just subscribed and following along, you don't have to pay anything. It's free. Now, if you want to go and read the archive, well, then yeah. So Miss Tasha saying agreed. I actually have had a very prophetic dream, but was young and denied it to myself. I wish I had believed earlier. That's why I published this stuff on Substack because sometimes I have precognitive dreams. So what I do is I just document them before they happen, and then when they happen, then I confirm that they happen. I mean, I don't have it. It doesn't happen that often. Maybe 4 to 5 times that I've documented, but you have them. Back to Roger's story. Now, before the evil spirit came, I heard my dad trying to get my mom in a romantic mood. So that may have been what drew in the evil spirit. My dad likely drew this kind of being from his behavior. Okay. Huh. Yeah, Solite US Expat. Just go to Whitley Strieber's website. It doesn't say the interview doesn't say Dean Radin on it. It's just like it was in the last few days. So just go to videos, go to the latest, and it says something like these people don't have the psychic gene or something like that. But there's nothing that says Dean Radin on it. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Solite USA. Hit like, subscribe, all that jazz, please. Yeah, and this is highly unlikely, but If you can encourage people to subscribe so that we get to 20,000 on this stream, that would be awesome. But I'm so far from that right now that yeah, Tim Beck. Yeah, apparently aliens dislike high iron blood. Steve Mara. Could I eat hermitite? I eat so much meat. I That's probably why I never have any experiences. Yeah, Miss Tasha. So funny science is finally admitting epigenetics. Yeah, I was watching that today actually. So Solite USA. Oh, cool, Jesse. Michaels just had an interview with Dr. Peter Levenda, CIA historian, aliens control our government. Yeah, it's good. It's a good like. I like Peter Levenda. He's a good dude. Hey, Sirius, good to see you. Ads? There shouldn't be any ads, at least right now. So Philip Blair is just saying ads, but there's no ads. I have ads turned off, at least for the live stream. After the live stream, I load this sucker with ads. There's no doubt about it. But sorry, I'm just going through his. I mean, these comments are endless. Uh oh. Philip Blair said, "Did you see the story of the boy genius who was worried about CERN? Do say more." So Tim Beck is saying synchronicities have no inherent meaning. Frustrating, yes. It's an unconscious manifestation. Mandela can't speak to that without being whack and long-winded, weirded. Okay. Hey, missing time 420, 420. I love it. Yeah, so Sirius is saying synchronicities can be communication. Really depends on what's going on. Well, thank you, Tim. Tim says good stuff, Sean. Okay, so Philip Blair is saying world's smartest kid reveals CERN opened a portal to another, and it's a clip from Joe Rogan. What? Miss Tasha is saying CERN is scary for more than one reason. I hate to be that way, but okay. So Cambodia Remy Zero is saying from mumbling to shouting. Why? Because there was noise in the background that I had to overcome. Well, just that, so Urantia 1001, just ask me. Let's see. So Miss Tasha saying, I think we all have the potential, but like any other trait, it's more in some but other than others. But like learning to read, we have cultivated, not cultivated learning to do it. We need to in the future. Who, what made the gods? Source. I don't know. It's a good question, Urantia 1. It's so light. Already asked it for me because his kids are being loud. So that's Sean's signal to be quiet. That's 100% correct. Solite US expat. You've been on here for so much. Yeah, that's so great. All right, laughing my ass off. I love when Sean does that. It's like the old trick. La 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 la. I can't hear you. Oh, that's weird. So Birdie Ghost, O negative Anunnaki Atlantean bloodline. Intel community monitor people with O negative and certain traits. Left-handedness, hazel eyes. Yeah. So Birdie's Ghost, I am O positive. I have hazel eyes, and I was born kind of left-handed, and my family basically trained me to be right-handed. So, like with in baseball, I bat left-handed. It's very strange, but I'm now right-handed. So, who knows? Oracle Ralphie, take a breath, do a stretch, have a burp. Yeah, this one was long. Are you too, Roger Claiborne, ambidextrous and hazel eyes too? Hey, Sally Fourth to Learn, welcome. Writes first time catching your show. Good stuff. I appreciate you. Thank you. And Sally Forth, Gray Owl's just messing with you. Don't. He tells everybody they're late. It's a thing. So that just means welcome. That's Gray Owl's form of saying welcome. So post bankruptcy, Malone 09 is saying I was in the gate program as a kid, 27 now, and coming to terms that absolutely this stuff identifies too well with my own personal private stories: sleep paralysis, demons, orbs, owls, seeing dreams. Yeah. This is the first comment I think I've seen from you post. So I don't know how long you've been following the channel, but the number, like the number of times I've seen an owl since 2002 is like 100x what I saw. I think I saw an owl once in my life until 2021. And then after that, I see them routinely 2 to 3 times a month easily. And most of the time catch them on camera, which I don't, that's not normal. That's not normal. And by the way, my Substack, I just every time I see like get one on camera, I just post it. So, huh? Kimberly Wilson is saying you can read my story at MUFON, case number 71168. She says I have Scottish, Irish blood, French, Canadian, and Irish. I also have green eyes. I do believe it runs on both sides of the family. So Birdie's Ghost is saying ancient Hindus with hazel eyes and left-handed were known as seers, similar thing in Celtic mythology. Yeah, Miss Tasha is saying I have so many questions about my childhood. Okay, so post-bankruptcy, Malone is saying seeing the same entity in Rhode Island that corroborates with the cultural stories of the Zulu peoples is either an amazing coincidence or I banished a demon in my bedroom before puberty. Nice. Nice. Crazy Cal is saying I have Scots, Irish, French, and Cherokee heritage. My mother has red hair and green eyes. I didn't start manifesting my experiences until my mid 40s. Interesting. Yeah, for what it's worth, my ancestry on my father is there's some Scots Irish there, but also like Irish from the Lynch family. And then on my mother's side, it's like Swiss and German mostly. But there's a mix of other stuff there too. But I definitely have a heavy piece of Celt. And then my wife's family is also like there's an Irish element and a Scottish element. So my children are like 3/4 Celt. Huh. Philip Blair said, I read a letter by a dad to his daughter saying goodbye before he was executed during one of the witch trials in Germany centuries ago. Yikes. Hey, thank you, Andy Chung. And by the way, thank you for being a member of the channel for so long. I appreciate you. I really do. So thank you. But yeah, we're almost there. We are almost there. In fact, I'm going to leave this comment on while I check to see kind of right where we are right now. Oh, yeah. So we are 65 subscribers away from hitting the target. So that's great. Although there was a channel that started less than a year ago called Polarity that already reached 100,000. So things like that. I'm not going to disparage the channel because good for him, but stuff like that just makes me angry, not at the person, but just at the process. Because I've been at this is year 4. And Crazy Cal said, I've also had 3 significant head injuries in my life. That's not good. So Spiritual Ascension says, well, you can imagine what happened to me during the Spanish Inquisition. Yikes. Oh, you're RH negative, Crazy Cal. Interesting. Thank you, Tim Beck. Cheers. The dad. Okay, so Philip P. Blair said, I just looked up the letter. The dad was Johannes Unius, and that's 24 July 1628. Bamberg, Holy Roman Empire. Very sad. Spiritual Ascension says, so many innocents lost. He had been the mayor of Bamberg. Yikes. Sirius is back. Yeah, so Spiritual Ascension says they recruited the Dark Ones and executed the Light Ones. All right, there are Greenland sharks still alive today who were around in 1628. Really? There are Greenland sharks still alive today who were around in... Wow. They're so ancient looking. I had actually reached out to him a few weeks ago, and he's like, oh, I'm busy, but, maybe later. And then I reached out again. Okay, well, how about later? And I haven't heard back. So US Expat is saying maybe Sean can get Dr. Peter Lavenda on again. I can't remember if he spoke about how aliens have infiltrated our government in depth on Sean's show. I know, I don't think he has, actually. Yeah, he offered, and so Gray Al writes, oh, yeah, I love typical Rob. He is Been trying to arrange the owl as a gift, but I love that. Yeah, he actually reached out to me. I haven't responded yet. I need to respond. He wants me on the show. So okay, so now I'm excited. Okay, so Philip Blair is writing. So I prompted Grok something that got a fascinatingly ponderous result at Through a Glass Darkly with Sean. Here it is. Oh boy. Okay, so Philip Blair said, pretending you are from 10,000 in the future, when was the first day of worldwide universal just peace on earth, and how was this achieved? Minimum 500 words. Okay. Hey, Espiolos from Peru. Uh-oh. Okay, so Crazy Cal is saying if you're being attacked by an entity channel, your rage and fight back. These things feed off fear. Born or made, more like born and or made. That's correct. Hey, Kurt W75 writes, "Hey Sean, hope you're doing great tonight, buddy. Thank you, my friend." Oh boy. All right, so Sinner 1337 says both a person is born with abilities, then the world gets in his face, dampens abilities. Traumatic events open people up again if they have it. I now fully support the mustache man. Oh boy, let's not go there. Let's not get the channel banned. Oh boy. Yeah, it is. It's possible. Philip P. Blair writes, I didn't know that it was possible to force a switch in writing hand unless you're already a bit ambidextrous. Maybe I am. But you do it young enough, you can just retrain your brains. I have no idea. Okay. Okay, so NDM saying I've seen a mantis and it gave me intense goosebumps. I still get these goosebumps sent to me, unnatural goosebumps. Okay, so Roger Claiborne says, got to turn on advertisement. YouTube might promote you more. Yikes. Oracle of Relphi is saying, what about people with dark hair and green eyes? I mean, that could very well be Cherokee back, like, then there's also the Black Irish, right, who have dark hair and probably green eyes. Sean, if you don't work harder, I'm unsubscribing. Hearing owls is also spooky. I love hearing owls. I hear them more than I see them, but it's always a good thing when I go outside and hear them. Yeah, I just haven't had time. I'm just like, so spiritual ascension, Sean, you should totally do a show with Rob. I have before. I haven't. I've been so Philip people are saying March 21st, 2147 is the day it gave me. That's interesting. Okay, so Tim Beck says Polarity Channel attracts the TikTok crowd. Sean, nice fella, has a casual, fun vibe. It works, covers ish, already covered. Nice guy. Yeah, he seems like a nice enough guy. Um, but yeah, I don't post on TikTok, so maybe that's why he like quickly reached 100,000. Um, yeah, Malone. If it ever shifts into a woman wearing white, run. That's fair. Oh my God, it's already. Uh, let's see. Okay, so Soulite expert, born blonde hair, blue eyes. I'd like to have seriously psi ability. Wait, say more. It's the dog that got polarity, the quick popularity. I must know more because whatever he did was highly successful. Nothing against him at all. I just, I'm jealous because I've been working my fucking nuts off for 4 years, and so let me know what the gimmick is or whatever. I won't copy it, but I'm just curious. Let's see. Oops. Okay, so injured cold is saying, "Hey, YouTube doesn't support my views whatsoever. I shall shut my mouth before I go full scorched earth." Oh wait, I just totally. Yeah, Philip Blair says I don't do much on TikTok except tinker with Grok. I might start a channel there next year just to try to grow this one, but I avoided it because it was controlled by the Chinese. It was basically a spy platform. Now it's controlled by the Israelis, so it's still a spy platform, but the people controlling it, well, I was about to say aren't as evil, but that's debatable. Oh, he keeps Q camera on his dog co-host Suki. Ah, okay. Hey, Kurt, thank you very much. For you, Sean, you have great knowledge and do awesome work. I appreciate you, buddy. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Oh, nice. We're at 52 likes already. So Tim Beck says Sean vetted was vetted. Promotion. Simple. I wish it was that simple. Doing collabs seems to help channels jump in subscribers. Yeah, I mean, I've tried it with um why am not remembering um Cosmic Road, but he's growing about as slowly as I am, even though he deserves to grow faster. Yeah, Israel's probably slightly less worse than China. Oh boy. All right, we are like way, way, way over. So I think I'm going to have to bid everyone adieu because a Jew, whatever the hell the French is. So, and I notice people are dropping off. So, anyway, have a fantastic rest of your weekend. Good luck next week. Enjoy your Thanksgivings next week. Next time I speak to everyone here, you will have gotten through, Thanksgiving. I'm looking forward to it myself. And, Godspeed and God bless. Good night.